Hello! I've talked about this on this channel before, but I think it's worth repeating. One of the most important things in sound design and probably any artistic work, objectivity. When you got your nose to the grindstone for hours and hours, you're so close to the thing that you can't even really see it anymore. And that's a big problem for us because we have to be able to try to hear things the way that someone who's not a sound designer might hear them. What things sound like to someone who's never heard them before. The first and the simplest way to reconcile this is to just take a break. Step away from it and come back later with fresh ears. But sometimes you have crushing deadlines that need to fall on some other means of regaining objectivity. So turn the volume way down till you can barely hear it. And you'll hear all kinds of things you couldn't hear before. A certain sound or frequency is poking out, or you've turned the sound into mush, or it just doesn't read well in context. And suddenly you can start making confident decisions about what level something should be relative to something else. These footsteps are too loud, or I can barely hear this kick drum anymore, or this punch gets totally lost in the mix when I don't have everything cranked. I have a toggle switch set up here to turn my master down by -18 dB, and I switch it every 5 minutes or so to regain some perspective on what I'm working on. Gain match. Okay, this is a really big one, especially when we're doing processing like limiting, clipping, and saturation. Something I struggled with a bit on a recent project is going a little overboard with my clipping. It's super subjective and different people can accept all different levels of clippery. You know, like there's this popular song, which I guess I can't play on YouTube, but go look it up. It's clipped, and we love it. And really a lot of songs are like that. Audible distortion is becoming more and more acceptable to people, but that's kind of its own video. So the problem is our ears are biased towards loudness. If you pick between two sounds, we'll basically always prefer the louder one. And that creates an issue when you start clipping things because you'll automatically think it sounds better as it gets louder, which is a trap. And you might not tune in to how distorted it's gotten. So the way I finally overcame this is I started gain matching my clippers and limiters, and suddenly I'm not getting deceived by loudness anymore. Instead, I'm making an informed decision and able to listen critically to if the low end has started to crap out and distort. And most importantly of all, listen to the transients. As you sweep through, pushing the signal into your clipper or limiter or both, listen carefully to the transient. Somewhere along the way, it turns into mushy, dense white noise, and it's no longer punchy and dynamic. And again, that might be exactly the texture you want for some particular layer, but if it's punch you want, you have to listen carefully, quietly, and decide where the sound is no longer smacking you in the face and has now become soup. If you're gain matching, you can really home in on that point of diminishing returns and you're able to pull it back to a point of balance. Check the mid-range. You've probably heard the phrase, the magic is in the mid-range, and it's sort of true. Our ears are most sensitive in that range, and it's the one area where any speaker, no matter how shitty, can accurately reproduce it. So I have another toggle up here that applies a really tight mid-range filter across my master, and it gives a whole different perspective on what's going on with my sounds and how well it'll translate to shitty flat screen TV speakers or a phone or a laptop or whatever. I might have had my punches or kick drums so focused on the low lows that only somebody with a subwoofer is really going to feel it. And I might want to rethink how I can represent that feeling of weight higher up in the frequency spectrum, because frankly, most consumers are listening back on shitty systems. So how do you give that feeling of weight on crappy speakers? Well, you could make a whole video on that, but the super abridged version is to use saturation. You create harmonics from the low end that extend into those upper frequencies, and you basically trick the ear into feeling like there's more low end than there is. That's the principle behind enhancers like Waves R-Bass. You gotta be realistic in that an iPhone speaker will never punch you in the chest, but certainly you can create that impression. Test on other speakers. It's the same principle as before where you're seeing how your mix holds up under different frequency responses. And you're never going to get it perfect. It's a game of whack-a-mole where maybe the high end is way too hyped on a laptop, but then it sounds too dull on your monitors, or the low end sounds right on a phone, but is overbearing in the car. You have to just find a spot where you're reasonably happy with the sound on a range of different speakers without getting entirely obsessed, because that's a fight you're not going to win. Change listening position. Leave the room. What does it sound like when you listen from outside the studio? Down the hall in another room? See, in my opinion, we're not just mixing things relative to themselves or even to other mixes. We're not just competing with our own snare sound, we're also competing with the kitchen sink and the traffic passing by outside and the air conditioner and the chatter of people at the coffee shop. If I put on a YouTube video and I can put you in the other room and still make out every word as I wash the dishes, I say, God bless you. You have made my life so much easier as a listener. That's the type of perspective you get when you move to a different room. And the last thing is use references. We all know this one by now. Pick something similar that you think sounds really good and A/B it with your own work. Does it still hold up? Is anything missing? Anyway, that's all I got. Goodbye!